Good morning. We're going to examine a topic this morning. I want to talk with you about anger and revenge. The first passage I want us to start with back in Exodus chapter 32, where we see Moses' anger. Exodus chapter 32, we're going to read verse 19. This is, of course, the occasion Moses has led the people of Israel out of Egypt, across the Red Sea. Of course, it's God leading him and them. They've come down to Mount Sinai, and Moses has gone up into the mountain to receive the law, and that law, the 10 Commandments of it at least, have been carved into 2 tablets of stone. And Moses is coming back down the mountain. God has already told him the people have done terrible things at the foot of the mountain. And in Exodus chapter 32, verse 19, it came about as soon as Moses came near the camp, and he saw the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger burned, and he threw the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. We don't like breaking things. You know, sometimes you break things at home. Broken other glass. It's not often, I think, that we take something and throw it deliberately to break it, much less something that God has just given you, representing his law. That's exactly what Moses does. I don't know if Moses did this purely out of uncontrolled anger, or if he's doing this as a symbol of what the Israelites have done. They have broken the law that God just gave them. And so he takes these 2 tablets of stone. Fine, you break the law, I'll break this law. That illustrates what you, Israel, have done. I don't know exactly if that was what was in Moses' thought or not. But he smashes those tablets against the mountain. And his anger burned as he did it. Sometimes we see anger in God as well. We see anger in Jesus in Mark chapter 3. Mark chapter 3. We're going to read the first 5 verses of this chapter. And he entered again into a synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they were watching him, they were watching Jesus, to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath in order that they might accuse him. So you've got these guys standing around. Maybe he'll try to heal this guy, and we'll have him because it's on the Sabbath, and we can accuse him in front of everybody for violating the Sabbath, as they understood it. Verse 3, and he said to the man with the withered hand, "Rise and come forward." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill?" He asks them that question, but they kept silent. The hypocrisy of people who are against you, but when you ask them a logical question, they won't answer it. That induces some anger. It did with Jesus. Verse 5, and after looking around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." So anger. We can't condemn anger just outright, like a blanket condemnation. Anger is a sin. We can't do that. We see Jesus is angry here. So when is anger right? When is anger wrong? Back in Exodus chapter 32, Moses' brother Aaron thought that Moses' anger was out of place. Exodus chapter 32, verse 21. Then Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you that you brought such great sin upon them?" And Aaron said, "Don't let the anger of my Lord burn. You know the people yourself, that they are prone to evil." Aaron says, "Oh, don't be angry. You know it's these people. They're going to do these kinds of things. Don't get bent out of shape about it. Moses seems to disagree. Moses is angry at this whole situation. Why was Moses' anger justified? As I believe it was. God had brought this people out of slavery, out of that terrible situation in Egypt where they were and where they could not escape. He had shown them the miracles demonstrating his power and his concern for them. He had made them his special nation. He was leading them to the promised land that flows with milk and honey. And they get to this mountain, and if they have to wait a few more days than they wanted for Moses to come back down, they decide, well, we'll just build a calf and worship that. The injustice of that whole situation, their ingratitude, how wrong they were. Moses is right to be angry. And he's angry not at an offense toward himself so much as being angry at an offense toward God. We often get more angry at personal injury than we do against offenses against God. You know, somebody does some terrible, ungrateful thing in relation to God. They turn against God. They rebel against God, and we're like, wish he wouldn't do that. That's terrible. But he does something against you, and I can't believe what he did to me. Do you see how sometimes we get a lot more angry when we're offended than when somebody does something offensive to God? Moses was angry here because of how they rebelled against God and violated the law that God was just giving them. Anyway, so anger is sometimes appropriate. But if anger is sometimes appropriate, why are all those biblical warnings against anger or about anger in the Bible? Let's notice some of those. James chapter 3, verses 5 through 8. This particular passage is about more than just anger, but it's how we use the tongue. And of course, that's very directly related to anger, or can be, at least. One of the problems, or one of the challenges with dealing with anger is that it can kind of run its own course if we don't control it. And we'll notice several passages about that, especially in the Proverbs. We get angry and then we just let it take over and rule what we say and how we react and what we do. James chapter 3, verse 5. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. Behold, how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body and sets on fire the course of our life and is set on fire by hell. For every species of beasts and birds, of reptiles and creatures of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by the human race, but nobody can tame the tongue. That's one of the problems of dealing with a lot of things about how we use the tongue and words, but especially with anger, is we're not controlling it. We're letting it control us. And you can tame a wild animal if you're able to control it. But we so often have not really tamed our tongues, and we get angry, and it takes over. That anger takes over, and it's uncontrolled and does bad things. James chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. While we're here in James, we might as well notice this pair of verses. James 1:19. This you know, my beloved brethren, but let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Why? For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. Okay, somebody does some terrible thing, and you get angry about it. That's not a bad response. It's acceptable to be angry when somebody does some terrible thing. But if you don't control that, then you begin, well, like James chapter 3 talked about the tongue, setting on fire everything. And you just launch into this person with all kinds of accusations and what they did 10 years ago, and you don't like the way they part their hair either, and just everything that you can come up with to express your anger to this person, and that did no good for them to see the actual damage and error of what they had done. They just see you're an angry maniac. So be slow to anger, for the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. When we're angry at what some person does, some bad thing that a person does, you can approach them very constructively, and your anger can motivate you to do that, and that's good. But so often we just vent that anger in a very unhelpful way. Let's go back to the book of Proverbs. We're going to notice several passages from the Proverbs this morning. Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 14. The beginning of strife is like letting out water, so abandon the quarrel before it breaks out. You know what Hoover Dam looks like, right? Out there in Arizona. I guess it's on the border of Arizona, or is it, well, regardless of whether it's on the border or not. It's there at the south end of Lake Mead, the downstream end of Lake Mead. And it's this huge dam in this big canyon, and it holds back that water. And that water is calm, and it's there, and it's controlled. But if you break that dam, are you going to have an easy time controlling the water that is now gushing through that broken dam and down through the canyon that follows? No. Very little way to exert any control over that water that is now rushing through the canyon. Chapter 17, verse 14 of Proverbs, the beginning of strife is like letting out water. So abandon the quarrel before it breaks out, because you won't be able to control what goes on after that. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 16. Chapter 12, verse 16. A fool's vexation. I can't think of any time I've used the word vexation outside of a sermon in my life. We don't use that word very much. But when you are just troubled to such a degree that something's boiling within you, a fool's vexation is known at once, but a prudent man conceals dishonor. If somebody does something and it vexes you, there's wisdom in kind of holding all of that in and keeping it controlled and thinking about what's the best way to respond to this atrocious thing that somebody has just done. But a fool's vexation is immediately known, because he just blows up. He flies off the handle, we say. Have you ever thought about that expression, to fly off the handle? I suppose, and in fact, this happened to me just about a week ago. I was chopping wood in my backyard with a wood burner, and as I hit, the axe head flew off the handle. And I'm glad it flew off the handle away from me instead of toward me, because it is a big, heavy axe head. If there had been somebody standing right there, it could have messed up their ankle pretty bad. We fly off the handle like that, and we just go hurtling off in some direction, criticizing somebody in ways that aren't particularly helpful, and it just does more damage than good. A fool's vexation is known at once, but a prudent man conceals dishonor. Proverbs chapter 30, verse 33. Proverbs 30, verse 33. For the churning of milk produces butter. And pressing the nose brings forth blood. So the churning of anger produces strife. I've never churned butter. Any hands, any of you ever churned butter? Nobody here? Oh, got one. Churned butter. I've never done that. I've two. I've seen it done on TV. So I've got two experts in the audience. I don't know if I'll get this exactly right, but you just got to work that milk. I guess you've got milk in there, and you're churning, trying to turn it. Okay, we've got three maybe back there, and it's work, but it turns finally into butter. The churning of anger produces strife. You're angry at something, and you just sit and you just stir that pot. I know I'm mixing metaphors here, but you just stir that pot. You just sit in your anger, and you're just working that thought in your head like churning butter. And all that does is produce strife. It's not a good way to deal with anger, to just sit and work it and work it and work it. That's just going to create more problems. And the result, the kind of problem that this verse talks about is strife. You're upset at this person, and because of the way you're approaching it with your anger, just making more and more, they become angry at you, and there's strife, there's argument. Instead of any healthy discussion of what's happened, there's just strife. And that's not good. So those are some thoughts about anger, but beyond anger is revenge. Revenge. We don't use that word. We don't say, because, we're Christians and we don't believe in revenge, and so we don't say, I'm going to take revenge on that person. We say, I'm going to teach him a lesson. I'll teach him, and we think we're justified because that's a helpful thing. He needs a lesson. And out of the goodness of my heart, I'm going to teach him that lesson. Because I'm going to do this to him, and he'll see how stupid that thing he did was. But it's just revenge. That's all that is. Proverbs chapter 24, verse 29. Chapter 24, verse 29. Do not say, thus I shall do to him as he has done to me. I will render to the man according to his work. We know Jesus' statement, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And you know how people corrupt that and say, well, yeah, I go by do unto others as they've done to you, or do unto others before they do unto you. And that was known in Israel back in these days, because God has to warn them. Solomon, writing these Proverbs, warns them. I've lost my verse now. Chapter 24, verse 29. Do not say, thus I shall do to him as he has done to me. Don't take revenge. Don't say, well, he did it to me, so I'm going to get him back, and I'm going to show him. See, that's helpful. I'm going to show him something. I'm going to teach him. Chapter 20, verse 22 of Proverbs. Do not say, I will repay evil. Wait for the Lord, and he will save you. Somebody does something really bad to you, and you want to strike back, and you want to say something that just cuts him down in front of everybody. And you want that sense of justice right there, and you want to bring about that justice. But the Proverbs tell us, don't say, I will repay evil. Wait for the Lord, and he will save you. We'll notice some more verses about that. Let's turn to Romans in the New Testament, Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12, beginning in verse 17. Never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all men. If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Can you be at peace with all men? No, you're not going to be able to be at peace with all men. But so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. In other words, don't you be the reason for there not being peace between you and any other person. If there's a lack of peace, it should only be because that person refuses to be at peace. We should be trying to be at peace with everyone. If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. That was the thought back in that last Proverbs we read, that last proverb we read. Wait for the Lord. Here, never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. So what are we to do to a person who does us wrong? I'll expose him. I'll teach him a lesson. I'll do unto him as he's done unto me. No, verse 20. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap burning coals upon his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. When somebody does something evil to us, and we respond with vengefulness, that's us being overcome by the evil that person did. Just because somebody does something harmful to me doesn't mean I've been overcome by that person or the evil he did. I've suffered some consequences, but it doesn't mean I've been overcome. When I turn around and respond in the same way, that's when I've been overcome. It defeated me. Instead of me rising above, it defeated me. I've been overcome by evil. Don't be overcome by evil, but rather overcome evil with good. Somebody does something to you that makes you justifiably angry. Don't be a fool whose vexation is immediately obvious to everybody. Don't take your own revenge. When somebody does something that makes you justifiably angry, do something good. And maybe that's a sit-down logical conversation with that person about, you did this to me, that wasn't right. But don't be vengeful. Don't vent your anger in an uncontrolled way. Do something good. So that could be a sit-down, logical, calm conversation about the problem. It could be just you doing something nice for them, helpful to them, to show that as far as it depends on you, you're going to be at peace with that person. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil. That's hard to do because of the nature of anger. You get angry, and it's a challenge to keep your thoughts straight and cool in that moment. But that's what we're called upon to do. Somebody does something on the highway that is just the thing you hate the most from other drivers. It can be hard to keep your cool and do what you ought to do in that situation. Maybe at your place of work, the management and everybody else, they just make your life horrible because they don't treat you right, and they create these conditions that are so much worse than they should be. You should be able to do this and do that without too much difficulty, but the policy or whatever, just everything's horrible, and you get angrier and angrier about that. It's hard sometimes to control ourselves and keep our mental state good and healthy instead of just sitting in our anger, churning that anger. Instead, we want to put people in their place, and we want to be the one to carry that out. Proverbs 24, verse 17 this time. Proverbs 24, verse 17. Do not rejoice when your enemy falls, and do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles, lest the Lord see it and be displeased, and he turn away his anger from him. Do not fret because of evildoers. So you've got this person that just angers you and it leaves you stressed all of the time, and he goes down. Maybe you've helped him go down. Don't rejoice. Don't see that as this wonderful thing to rejoice over. And so certainly don't be a part of bringing that person down like that. Don't let your heart be glad when he stumbles, lest the Lord see it and be displeased, and he turn away his anger from him. The Lord, if your enemy is brought low, it may well be because the Lord is directly doing something, because he sees the injustice that person carries out in his life and in the lives of people around him. Don't you rejoice, he got hit hard today. Don't rejoice about that, lest the Lord turn his anger away from that person and maybe toward you. Don't fret because of evildoers. People are going to be evil. It's the nature of the world. There's going to be some evil people around. Don't fret about it. Don't sit and just stew about that problem. That's going to lead you to bad things. It's going to lead you to revenge. And that's not where we should be. So as we wind up our lesson this morning, train yourself for controlling the anger that can arise in us. Anger is not a bad thing by itself, but it must be controlled. Train yourself for that. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 18, something we need to remember here. A hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but the slow to anger pacifies contention. You have a hot temper, you get angry fast, makes everything worse. But, what's my verse again? Verse 18. But the slow to anger brings peace to a conflict, pacifies contention. Chapter 15, verse 1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. It's two ways we can respond to stupid things people do, to hurtful things people do. We can respond with a harsh word that okay, situation's about to blow up now. They did something wrong, harmful, and you react very harshly. And you see it on the internet all the time. If you're on the internet looking at discussions between people who don't even know each other, and one person says something that upsets another, and the second person calls that person an idiot, and the fight is on. And that happens in real life, not just on the internet. Chapter 16, verse 32. He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who captures a city. Capturing a city is not easy. There's a war on the other side of the world right now, where one side has been trying to capture a specific city for, I think, about 7 months now. Capturing a city can be hard, but it can be done. But something even more impressive than capturing a city is he who rules his spirit. He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who captures a city. There's something to be happy about when you learn to rule your spirit. and maintain control of the anger that can come up within us. I'm going to close with two passages we've looked at already. James chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. This you know, my beloved brethren, but let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. And Romans chapter 12, verses 18 through 21. If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap burning coals upon his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So I invite you to think about this morning your own habits, your own tendencies. We all see things that can make us angry, maybe do make us angry, but how do we deal with that? And do we try to get revenge? Do we try to vent our anger in a hurtful way to really show them how angry I am? Try to hurt them? Or do we leave room for the wrath of God and try to respond in more helpful ways to the bad things that do happen around us? In a moment, we're going to sing our song of invitation, Let Him In. Not the anger, but the Lord. Let the Lord into your life. If you have need this morning, would you come as we stand and sing?
There's a strange